So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome film director, producer, fellow podcaster, a secret spy, I believe, Chris Carr. Welcome.
Thank you. What an introduction.
And in this episode, we will talk about your latest spy film called The Dry Cleaner. First of all, basically, can you give my listeners and viewers a little bit of context of what The Dry Cleaner is about shortly?
The Dry Cleaner is a kind of contemporary spy drama. It focuses on a British intelligence officer called George, who's kind of under pressure from his management to kind of get insight into an sort of extremist group and a revolutionary group known as the FKA. And he recruits a student named Lydia, and he's basically kind of in a situation where he's not sure whether she's going to help him or not. So the whole film is kind of revolves around that question.
In terms of writing this, I think we can go back and start with your passion for spies.
So like most, English boys, you grow up with James Bond, and I grew up with James Bond, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and for years that was kind of like my reference. It was all exciting, it was all pretty cool. And then in my later teenage years, there was this TV show on Channel 4 called Wanted, and it used to have this guy on it called Oleg Gordievsky, and Oleg Gordievsky is like this sort of KGB defector who came to the West. A few years later, I was working part-time in a supermarket, and one of my customers was Oleg Gordievsky. And it was like, wow, this sort of super spy who may have prevented World War III was one of my customers. So I kind of went up to him and asked him, "Excuse me, sir, are you Oleg Gordievsky?" And he was like, yes, I am. And then I asked, we had a little bit of small talk, and I asked him a bit about his experiences, and then he recommended I get his book, which is a book called Next Stop Execution. And great salesman there. And that book totally changed my perspective of spying. So I was a teenager. I was studying at sixth form college. I was studying psychology, drama, and media studies. And I had the film bug all my life and fascinated by spies and stuff. And what I realized through this book was espionage is very much the stuff of drama. It's not blowing stuff up. It's not getting involved in shootouts. It's actually literally two people from opposing sides in a room who have to kind of trust each other, because there's a lot of danger, because if one of them gets caught, they can get in a lot of trouble. And in the case of Oleg, he would have been executed had he been caught. And it just, to me, was the stuff of drama. I thought, this is amazing.
Did the research happen before or after you've decided you're going to make this film? Like, obviously, the research inspired you, or when you decided you make a film, you did like tons of research after as well.
Yeah, a bit of both. With regards to The Dry Cleaner, so the original idea came to me 10 years ago, actually. I was on holiday in 2011. As I was saying, I hit 30 and I was like, my goodness, I need to be directing something. And so the idea was kind of born on that holiday. And then I sort of looked at a few spy books, and I thought about originally, so the Dry Cleaner went through kind of 3 iterations before it became what we know. The first one was very much a rather ridiculous story called Moscow Rules, where it was about, and some of it can reflect my life, but it was about an office temp who was obsessed with spies, whose wife gets kidnapped. And through his knowledge from spy books, he kind of tries to figure out where his wife is and sort of sort out the kidnappers. And that was a completed script. And it wasn't great. It was fun to write, but it really wasn't great. Then another iteration happened, which is where George and Lydia kind of began. And that was The Dry Cleaner with a K. And that one was a bit more suspense. It was very Hitchcockian, very suspense. But it was a bit, the problem was with that script, the filmishness and the suspense kind of got in the way of depth. It was a very shallow story, but I would say quite, exciting and suspenseful. We even had this scene in the script, which I always quite liked, but it never happened. where so in this story, Lydia discovers George, her spy handler's dead, and then she kind of gets potentially accused, or she's suspected of maybe killing him. And then as she leaves the safe house, she bumps into someone in the street who later on the police, interview, and they try and do a sketch of what she looked like. And I had this idea of like using the sketching process as a kind of way, whilst we're going through the story, that you slowly build her face, and at the end of that scene, it's like, there she is. But so that was the other version. And then finally, the dry cleaner, as we know it today, was born, and I wanted to make it more. So at the time, obviously you had the Arab Spring in the Middle East and lots of other things. I kind of wanted to make it more meaningful. I didn't want to gloss over a lot of things. And by then I'd read quite a few spy books and also some really interesting books on extremism. And there's one book in particular called The Double Bind by Meredith Tax, who actually ended up being the first guest on my podcast, which we'll talk about a bit later. And she talked about this sort of problematic relationship between the Anglo-American left and the Islamic right. So Islamic extremism effectively comes from the right wing of Islamic culture, a bit like how extremism in the West usually comes from neo-Nazis. It's very similar. And so when I realized that, so to understand the language of extremism and how they kind of bring people in, I started to realize there's something quite interesting here. And also on top of that, during that time, there was a lot of incidents with extremists, people connected to Al-Qaeda or ISIS who were from university, and they were flying out to Syria, Iraq and things like that. And there was a lot of things going on in the UK on British campuses where, extremist groups were suddenly platforming moderate Muslims and things like that. And so there's just a whole cocktail of things going on.
Speaking of locations, can you tell my listeners, so basically and viewers, they are from around the world. Yeah. And secondly, a lot of them are aspiring filmmakers. Yeah. So can you tell them firsthand how friendly is London in terms of filming? And is it a painful process to get those filming permits and get this done? Or is it quite okay and easy?
It could be both. So depends on the project, depends how you present yourself. So with the dry cleaner, so we film at a university campus. We film in quite a few independently owned shops. We also film in a private flat that doubles for the safe house. We also film on the streets of London, East London, West London, and then we film in another private residence. So private residences are pretty easy. With the safe house location, I put a call out on Facebook. I put up some images saying, I'm looking for something like this. Does anybody know anybody or anybody? And a few people came back, and then a very lovely lady let us use her flat. We had to pay her, but we paid her quite a moderate amount of money, what it could have been, and it was a lovely looking flat. We had to empty it out and then put back in what we wanted. No, she was incredibly supportive, bless her, and was very helpful. Then we had another privately owned flat, and that again was pretty straightforward. So the shops were more complicated, and so what I did do with the dry cleaner, I was writing locations that in fact, I was talking to locations as I was writing the script. I chose Brick Lane, East London, and sort of Shoreditch, that kind of area, because there's a lot of independently owned shops, and from experience, independently owned shops are far easier than filming in shops that are owned by big brands. Because if you deal with a big brand, you've got to deal with their corporate headquarters, and then it starts getting really murky, because then they start asking questions about what the film's about. So as soon as you mention the word terrorism, people are like, oh, no, we don't want that. And I learned very quickly, actually, we always use the word spy film. And we, in one of our locations, I've got I've got this great story from our last day of filming. It was, we had to do, so the film ended up being broken up in a couple of ways. So the dialogue scenes, I did a chunk over 4 days because I knew I need most of my crew for that. But for the street scenes, I wanted a skeleton crew, so I kind of shot it a bit more like a music video, because we just had to literally, we picked locations that were walkable. So all the shops, you could walk within 15 minutes and get to the other shop. And that was also by design. And so anyway, on the last day of filming, we had basically, it was kind of like a pickups day. We had to pick up a few shots in around St. James's, where the sort of finale happens, where Lydia realizes who's following her, goes up these stairs, things like that. We had to pick up a few shots there that we had missed because we ran out of light previously when we shot that scene. And for some reason, we that location was pretty straightforward. That was a little area around the back of Westminster, and we got permissions quite easy. So we didn't really put much thought into going back there. I don't know why. We just thought, it'll be fine. And for some reason, it completely missed all of us that it was VE Day, Victory Europe Day. And there was a massive parade going on around Westminster, and the police used our location. No, I say our location, we didn't own it, but used that area for a kind of like staging ground for all their stuff. So there were snipers on the roof. There were like police vans full of like SAS guys. There was all sorts, and even roadblocks. I was like, oh my God. So as a director, you're like, you got this shot list, and that's all you kind of care about is getting your shot list. And the second you see all that, you're like, the first thought I had was, we're not going to be able to finish this film. I'm like, oh my God. And I had to take about 10 minutes because I was really like freaked out. I was like, oh my God. So I walked off for 10 minutes and kind of calmed down. And then we slowly figured out what we could get away with and stuff. And anyway, so whilst all this was going on, there's this huge parades, there's tourists, there's all sorts of stuff going on. And slowly I think the police at first thought we were like news people going to film the parade. They didn't seem to be bothered by us, but because we were hanging around so long and then like getting out more and more elaborate bits of equipment, like they started to wonder, who the hell are these people? And so the guy who was in charge of the whole kind of police operation that day storms over to my AD. It's like, who's in charge here? And then literally on cue, everybody points their finger at me. It's a bit like that scene, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, like, there he is, and suddenly I'm like, what's going on? And this policeman storms right over to me. He's like, what's going on here? And I'm like, well, we're trying to film a spy film here. And I explained that we had all these permissions and stuff, and in the end, so I said, what are you doing? A spy film? He's like, I like spy films. Yeah, just get on with it. Don't get in the way. Get on with it. Fine. And I'm like, wow. So we got on with what we got to do. And then in the end, there's this one shot where in the film you see Lydia's walking down this street, and then we kind of pull focus to the person following her. Yeah. So that was filmed on VE Day. Now that was the bit where the parade was. Luckily the parade long gone by then. So by the time I got around to doing that shot, it was dead around there. But the problem was we kept having people staring at us. So I asked one of the policemen, is there anything they could do about it? And they moved some of the people out of the way so we could get that shot, which was very kind of them, because I think they were bored by this point. But because obviously the one thing I've learned, when you watch film units work, because they work so slowly, it does get very boring. It's initially quite exciting, and then it's just people standing around, and then things happen, and then that's it.
I wanted to talk about, I like the sequence, so also the start of the film. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of editing going on. So suppose a lot of things happened in the actual editing room. Mm-hmm. And my question especially for these spy films, sequences where somebody is followed or somebody stalking someone, how much it is in your head before you film? Like, what is the vision? You literally see it to every detail. Yeah. And how much it happens in the editing room? Is it completely different, or it's literally your vision?
Yeah, it got better in the editing room. So in fact, that opening sequence was one of the hardest things to get my head around when I was working on the development of the film. So in pre-production, I kind of went out because I realized I wanted to use stills camera for Lydia's point of view. And that both was an artistic choice and a practical choice, because I knew that we were going to only have half an hour per shot. And we would no way in hell get all the coverage we needed in half an hour. But if I sent a lowly stills photographer of a couple of people just to hang around the shop afterwards, I could probably get more material. So that's kind of where that started from. And also it was inspired by a great French film called La Jetée, which is a beautiful film and uses stills photography. And so with the the opening sequence. So it had a bit of a goal as well. I wanted to introduce people to the style of the film early on, so they weren't abruptly brought out of the film because memory plays a role in this film, and memory is one of his themes I'm a bit obsessed with. But and I wanted to make sure people could tell what's the past and what's the present without having to like put on screen previously or whatever, you know what I mean? Flashback, you know, or have a flash to white and then now we're in the past, you know. I was trying to find subtler ways to do that. So I realized the opening minute of the film is kind of like the audience's introduction to the world and the style of the film. And I actually learned that from a director's commentary from Tony Scott, because he was talking about is it the film Man on Fire, I think it was, that has a lot of like hand crank camera stuff where it's a film camera and you're winding the film through manually, and you can change the speed and it can create these weird lovely effects, which is then, you know, it's what creates that kind of Man on Fire look, which was representative of the point of view of Denzel Washington. But you've got to kind of introduce your audience to it early, so when you do use it, it doesn't jar people out, because I've seen other films so they don't do that, and suddenly it just really brought out of the movie, and it kind of becomes jarring and confusing sometimes too. So that whole opening sequence, I literally, in my spare time before filming the film, I kind of went out with a stills camera, photographed lots of strangers, bless them. Never used those shots in the film. I just photographed everything. I filmed bits. I had some a temp track from our composer, Andy Bird, or Andrew R. Bird, as he's officially known. And his temp music was really helpful in helping me kind of figure out the pacing. And then we brought all those components together in the editing room, and we were, the editing took quite a while, because Christina, the editor, she and I were working on this between freelance projects, so it went on for quite some time, the editing, and it was just our side project, so yeah, I think we did if I remember the way editing worked, we did all the dialogue scenes first, because they're quite, I wouldn't say they're easy to edit, but they kind of have a logic that works and smoother. And then when you're trying to figure out like the language of dry cleaning and all that sort of stuff, that took forever. And when we were, constantly all sorts of things we tried out, and and even if I was to do it again, next time, so if I did it on a big budget, I probably would try and play around with, like film cameras and use some different kind of quality cameras, because I love that hand crank aesthetic, which I mentioned from Man of Fire. There's something in that could look quite good with dry cleaning, because one of the notes I got from a real surveillance officer I met before making the film was that you kind of, when you're actually doing dry cleaning, you do take snapshots in your head, but you don't necessarily take snapshots just of the people. You kind of take snapshots of what they're wearing and weird little details and movements and stuff like that. And I think like playing around with a hand crank camera, you could really capture that even more, that sensation.
It's just so fascinating.
Yeah.
And so you've got your podcast on.
Yes, Secrets and Spies.
Yes, so you interview spies basically. This film you made, The Dry Cleaner, inspired you to start a podcast.
It did, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you would never do it if you didn't make a film?
I don't think so. No, I mean, it's weird. I mean, as you can tell, I talk a lot. And like, when I was a kid, I was always told off for talking too much, stuff like that. So I'm sure at some point I may have found a subject and done a podcast of some description. But it wasn't, it was because of the film that, it was originally called The Dry Cleaner Cast. So it was a companion to the film. But I realized over time, no one knows what the hell dry cleaning is. And they thought it was about laundry and what have you. So I changed the name to Secrets and Spies. It's a bit more generic, but seriously, when I changed that name, I tripled my listenership in a week. It was bonkers. And so there's a big lesson actually about titling there, because even The Dry Cleaner for a short film title probably is a bit obscure. And the thing is, one thing I have learned is American spies are easier to get hold of than British ones because of the law. So British spies, it's very rare that I have interviewed a few, should I say intelligence officers. So a spy, if you want to be really nerdy about it, an intelligence officer is what we think of as a spy, and a spy is actually the asset. So the British people are very hard to interview because of the law. The Official Secrets Act doesn't really allow much room for writing memoirs about your career in espionage, whilst for the CIA it seems to be a lot easier. So I've interviewed an awful lot of American spies over the years.
How do you get in touch with spies? I mean, just like you mentioned Twitter, so you just go like, okay, spy, enter like, you know, Google spy, and then hello, are you a spy? I want you to podcast.
Well, there's quite a clique on Twitter of former CIA people, and so I suppose to answer your question. So first of all, Twitter's really good. Twitter's not perfect. So for every probably 5 guests I get on, I probably have 5 who don't ever get back to me, and that ratio's got better over the years. But Twitter's quite a funny one, and also sometimes a lot of those people don't have open direct messaging, so unless they follow you back, it's really hard to privately communicate with them. So sometimes you have to just take a leap of faith and just tweet at them saying, please go on my podcast, and you're lucky they might. So yeah, Twitter's really great for that, and I love Twitter. You know, Twitter's really good for following your interests and finding people. It's just not good to argue with people on it. It's just like, it's not a good idea.
Any idea for the future film?
One thing I've learned is it's not a good idea to spend all your time on one project, because you know, if you put all your eggs in one basket, it doesn't always work out. And I've met people over the years who, you know, you meet them and 10 years later still talk about the same film, which is myself included. I'm still talking about The Dry Cleaner, not that it's 10 years old, but it has been a long ongoing process. And I think many of my friends are now like, oh my God, not that film again. But, you know, so it's one of those things. But so I've got, over the summer, I wrote a TV pilot for, so one of my guests on the podcast wrote a novel and wants to turn it into a TV show. And, you know, a lot of back and forth, and then over the summer I spent 6 weeks writing this TV pilot, and it's now being read by a UK broadcaster. I have no idea what will happen after that, and sadly I can't say much more about it than that, but the fact that we got it read by a broadcaster and something I wrote, I'm like, wow, you know, so I feel quite pleased about that. Then I've got about 4 feature films that I've got to like a 3rd draft stage now, and they're in a pretty good shape. So I'm talking to producers and stuff and trying to use the sort of the success of The Dry Cleaner to hopefully get some conversations going. So I've got a few producers who are looking at that at the moment. I'm waiting to hear back from them. Luckily, I've got a bit of a production background myself, so if all else fails, I will have to do everything, which I'm trying not to, because producing and directing is really painful.
I have to thank you for your time, because
my pleasure.
Very valuable and insightful and interesting. And for everybody who wants to watch The Dry Cleaner, it's available on Prime Video and Apple TV, right?
That's it. Yep.
And if you want to get a taste, you can go on YouTube and watch the trailer and then jump on the full movie. Yeah. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's been great.